Good evening. This is Sheila Hunter standing in the shadow of the cross on Good Friday. As the traffic goes by at the end of the day, we see a gentle breeze blowing the prayer requests that are hanging from our cross. And we know on Good Friday the shadows will come. Would you hear these words? Today, God makes common cause with our human suffering. We read the scriptures, sing the hymns, feel the feelings of the day Christ died. Suffering is not rational. It has no answer. But in the cross, God meets us in our suffering. From this day forward, we know that there is nowhere we can go where God is not with us. God, into your hands we commend our spirits. As the sun is setting, we know the story of Good Friday, where Jesus was taken to the cross, tortured, and died with the forgiveness of sin. So today we sit with that sense of struggle. In just a moment, you will hear a story of a person's struggle with the grief of their own lives, the time that it took to understand something about God intervening, and the healing. Bill Hunt will share his story and then an original song that he has written called In the Shadow of the Cross. May we relate to the human suffering that it brings to us questions and doubt, but ultimately God who intervenes and heals. Go in peace.
So this is just an explanation of how I wrote the song In the Shadow of the Cross. I started writing In the Shadow of the Cross in the fall of 2017 and finished it in the summer of 2019. So it took me almost 2 years to write the song. And in hindsight, I'm glad that it took that long to write the song, because if I had finished it when I started it, it would have just been a bitter, ugly, just not a good song, not good for anybody. So the song is born out of something very tragic that happened in my church. Lost a very dear friend tragically. And, when it happened, the emotions that came over me were typical of things that happen like that to most people. God, how could you do this? How could you let this happen? Where were you on this one? Why have you abandoned us? We all had questions and we were all scared. Not only was it someone in our church, but it was one of my best friends. And so I was scared for my church. She was a very important part of our church. I was scared for our church. I was scared for our minister. I was scared for my friends. I was scared for my own family. Each member of my family had a unique relationship with this person. So there was a lot of fear there. And I'm one of those people who reads the Bible every day. And right after this happened, I still read the Bible, but I was just kind of going through the motions. I think I didn't really want to hear what God had to say. I was angry and I was scared. But after a little bit of time went by, I began to read the Bible more, started getting into it a little bit more. And I think what I was looking for at first were answers as to why this happened and how God could let this happen. And this went on for a few months, trying to find answers. And, if you've ever tried that before, you realize sometimes you're just not going to get answers, or at least the answers that you want to hear. But it was during that time that I started writing this song, and I wrote the first verse of the song, and if you listen to the song, it's kind of bitter, but God would not allow me to write further than that first verse. I put the song aside after that, and just tried to stay focused, stay in the Bible, and help do what I could to help my church through this time. So that right after this happened, it happened in the fall, and then we got through Christmas, which is obviously a big deal in any church. And I feel like myself is when I didn't really turn a corner, but my focus shifted from trying to find answers as to what happened to maybe just trying to find some peace and some comfort. And when I changed that attitude, it did a lot for me, because I was actually able to find a little bit of peace and comfort in the Word of God. And it's exactly how she would have wanted it. I take great comfort in the fact that a lot of our conversations over the last year before what happened were about spiritual stuff. Were about God and faith, and that gave me a lot of comfort to know that she was in a good spot with her relationship with God. So anyway, I started looking for comfort in the Bible, and I was able to find that, and that's where the second verse of the song came from. And that felt good to kind of move forward just a little bit. But again, God said, all right, that's all you're going to write for right now. So I finished that second verse, and I had to put the song aside again. And then it was a good while before I was able to pick it up again. I kind of hit a wall a little bit. Our church seemed like it was starting to gain a little momentum back, but I was still kind of stuck where I was, just still trying to look for peace and comfort. Still a little bit of anger, but not quite as much of the fear. The fear was just it was dissipating a little bit. And so, 2018 kind of came and went without a lot of change. At least, in this situation for me, emotionally and spiritually. And then 2019 came around, and we lost another member of our church tragically again. And all that fear came rushing back onto me, and those same questions came back of God. How could you do this? How could you let this happen? Where were you? Why is this going on? Why is this happening to us? And as much as that fear came back, what I noticed was I immediately dug right back into the Bible. I didn't pull away like I had done the first time. And I think the reason I did that was because when I dug back into the Bible this time, I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for a way that I could help my friends, that I could help my fellow members of my church get through this. I was praying for God to use me in any kind of way that I could bring some comfort to other people. And in hindsight, I realized, well, that was a big step from what had happened the first time. And so later that summer, I was reading through, I was following a devotional on my Bible app on my phone, and I was reading through the book of Psalms, and I came to Psalm 23. That's a psalm I've read 100 times, you probably have too, but it reminded me of a conversation that I had with the person that we had just lost recently. And I remember it was a conversation about Psalm 23 and how he thought it was just a beautiful piece of poetry, and how he thought it was just a great description of God and God's sovereignty and control. And so this time when I read Psalm 23, I read it in a whole new way, and it was like I was reading it for the first time, because I had a little bit different perspective of what it was about. And when I read it this time and I thought about that conversation, it was like God reached down and he put his arms around me and he said, man, I got this, okay? We're going to do this on my time. Be patient. but just understand that I'm here. I'm in control. I got this. And this feeling of peace came over me, and that fear just kind of fell away. And I knew how I was going to finish the song. I didn't have the words yet, but I knew how I was going to finish it. And so I spent, the next few weeks that summer working on the song and taking notes and coming up with stuff in my head. And then I read a verse in Psalm 36, and it immediately just, it really spoke to me. And it was God saying, it was, all the world finds shelter in the shadow of your wings. And that, I knew, I had kind of already had the title for the song, In the Shadow of the Cross. And so when I saw that come up, the whole world takes shelter in the shadow of your wings. It's like, man, that's so good. And I sat down and I finished writing the song in just a couple of days after I read that. And something I realized along the way when I was writing those final verses and when I was putting the song together, and I realized the song that had started out as something very tragic, a song about loss and grief and pain and fear, turned into what I think is a beautiful tribute to the sovereignty of God. And something that I realized when I was looking back in hindsight, when I was trying to find answers to all my questions, what I realized was God wasn't giving me any answers because he knew there was no answer that he could have given me that would have been good enough. And honestly, there's no answer now that he could give me that would be good enough. In my brain, I don't know. But I did find so much peace and comfort and just joy in what he was saying. One of my favorite books is the book of James. And right at the beginning, James says, "Count it all joy when you face trials of various kinds, because the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." Well, I couldn't see that. You know what? When these things happened, my first thought was, how am I supposed to count this as joy? This is horrible. This is the worst grief I've ever felt in my life. I'd never felt it so deeply before. So I was not finding any joy. But the fact that God made me take 2 years to write this song, and I look back at it now, I'm closer to God than I've ever been through this process of writing this song. So I'm so happy with how it turned out. The song is called In the Shadow of the Cross. You know, a lot of times we think of shadows can be good and bad. You know, we think of shadows as dark places where you don't know what's in there. But at the same time, taking shelter in the shadow of the cross, taking shelter in the shadow of God's wings. Shadows can also be very good. So anyway, I hope you'll go and listen to the song. It's called In the Shadow of the Cross. There's a video up on my YouTube channel. I hope you enjoy it. So this is a song I wrote called In the Shadow of the Cross. And it's just a song about the sovereignty of God and about how God is always in control. He's always been in control and always will be in control, even in the worst of times. There's a really cool story behind this song about how I wrote it and how it came to be. It took me 2 years to write it, and it was born out of tragedy. And so there's a video on my YouTube channel about how I wrote this song, and I would encourage you to go watch that video. In fact, go watch that video first before you watch this video. The song will make a little more sense to you. But for those of you who just want to listen to the song, this is called In the Shadow of the Cross. This is too much grief to bear. I need you to speak. Lord, are you even there? You say I'm free, so why do I feel so alone? I need your strength, just can't do this on my own. Can I find some comfort here? Can I find a way to lay aside my fear? Can you help me make some sense of what I've lost in the shadow of the cross? Lord, you took my hand, you made me whole. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You raised me up, you restored my soul. Goodness and mercy follow me. Lord, you wrapped your arms around me. You whispered in my ear. Led me safely through the valley of the shadow. Tell me, what then shall I fear? You brought me closer, God, to thee. You gave me shelter in the shadow of your wings. You helped me find some peace when everything seemed lost. In the shadow of the cross, I have found my shelter here, a place to put aside my brokenness and fear, a way to count as gain those things that I have lost in the shadow of the cross, a way to count as gain those things that I have lost in the shadow of the cross, in the shadow of the cross, in the shadow